Hello and welcome to another edition of iCan Media TV. I'm your host, Rob Hislop. On this podcast, we'll introduce you to a professor from the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University in Ottawa. Now, I recently heard Dr. Ian Lee speaking on the radio. He was actually talking about the Vancouver Aquarium and whether or not it should be keeping beluga whales and dolphins in captivity. What he was talking about, though, in relation to that subject was social activists and the impact they can have on organizations. Well, it turns out he also made reference to the petroleum industry, so we thought we'd track him down via Skype to talk to him about just that. Now, Dr. Lee, from what I understand, you actually teach the impact that social activists can have on the petroleum industry to your fourth-year students.
So one of the things they have to do is analyze a real-world company and analyze their competitors, of course, and analyze the demography and government regulation. But something that's increasingly important in some sectors, and I insist the students really focus on this, is especially upstream companies, oil and gas and mining companies. Because in the past 10 years or so, social activists have become ever more aggressive in trying to influence public opinion, trying to intervene in corporate decision-making, try to get politicians to elected officials to change the rules and regulations.
If I remember correctly, you were in Calgary not that long ago presenting a paper on this topic as well?
I was arguing that that NGOs, non-governmental actors, organizations, and especially so ANGOs, environmental NGOs, have become so, I would argue, not all, but some have become so brazen, possibly because of their successes, that they have, in my judgment, crossed the line in some respects, some areas, where they are saying things where I have actually caught them, so to speak, saying things that are just factually untrue. And so I suggested to this conference in Calgary that we may be at that point now where some NGOs, maybe a good number of NGOs, are acting so irresponsibly in the court of public opinion that maybe the time has come to regulate them. And I'm not referring to CRA in terms of determining whether they're charitable or not, but regulating them in the same sense that the SEC requires an annual disclosure document from publicly traded companies where they must disclose all kinds of information about themselves, including where they get their money and where their plans are and that sort of thing. And that's because of this interventionism, and I've testified beside NGOs on Parliament Hill before parliamentary committees where they have said things that are just flat out not true.
Now, just to be clear, it's not as if you're suggesting that all of these groups are perhaps abusing what appears to be some newfound powers.
Well, contrary to this mythology that's put forward by some organizations of the great powerful corporations and the corporate elites and so forth, I argue, and I by the way, I should disclose, I do not consult to anybody, anywhere, or anything. I don't consult to unions. I don't consult to people, to governments, to political parties, to corporations. 100% of my income is from Carleton University. I also don't have any investments, direct or indirect, in any industry anywhere, not banks, not oil and gas companies. So I'm one of those rare academics, rare people that can actually speak the truth to power, who isn't compromised by someone else's financial self-interests. And so I've argued that whereas in the early days, I think NGOs did perform a very valuable role. And, I'm talking back in the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, highlighting the dangers of acid rain, or, going back to Rachel Carson and Silent Spring and so forth. But we're now getting, what we're seeing is some environmental groups acting more and more like political parties. That is to say, they're grandstanding in the court of public opinion, making extravagant and outrageous comments to gain attention as a fundraising technique. And I'll name names. I'm thinking of Greenpeace. We understand corporations have financial self-interest. That's why, going all the way back to the 1930s, we in the United States, they, and then we in Canada said, okay, you big corporations, you've got to provide disclosure documents, which are legal documents. And if you provide or file false documents, we can prosecute you and on occasion send you to jail. That's how seriously we take that. However, these NGOs are making statements in the court of public opinion, often acting as paid professional lobbyists. It's not being disclosed that they are paid professional lobbyists, not disclosed to the larger public, I mean, in the court of public opinion. And they've increasingly gained a legitimacy that is in my view, contradicted by some of the actual behavior and background of some of these NGOs. These NGOs do have enormous sway and influence in the court of public opinion and are having a huge sway on Parliament.
Well, and you certainly don't have to look very far to see the influence that some of these social activists are having when it comes to the petroleum industry. Right off the top of my head, I'm thinking of projects like the Keystone XL pipeline and Northern Gateway as well. Now, you mentioned that unlike other groups, say First Nations, who actually live in the area, that many of these social activists actually come to this dispute with nothing on the line for themselves.
When the organization doesn't have skin in the game, and this isn't just for oil and gas, I realize you want to talk about oil and gas, and so do I, but this is a larger trend facing contemporary society. These NGOs are imposing demands on us, on this institution or that institution, which is run by a body of people who've been there for a long time, who are highly trained, and have been studying these issues themselves. The NGOs come along and make demands, influence public opinion. It's almost like a hit and run. And then the organization involved, whether it's the Vancouver Aquarium or it's Enbridge or somebody else, is left to pick up the pieces to try to come up with something that is viable after this hit and run by the NGO. And I'm using this language very deliberately because corporations, the impact of their decisions has a huge impact on the larger society. And so when the NGO derails, for example, a pipeline, which all of the empirical evidence from the policymakers in both the United States Department of Transportation, PHMSA, and in Department of Transportation in Canada show is the safest form of transportation of hazardous materials, they're imposing external costs onto all Canadians. And so that's what I meant by they don't have skin in the game. They can say something outrageous and convince people that it is true what they're saying, and then move on to their next cause du jour. And they've imposed costs on Canadian society, such as the diversion of hazardous materials onto railroads instead of pipelines, and there's no consequences for them. We're really in the Wild West with NGOs at this point, and I think that the time is fast coming that we're going to have to start to regulate NGOs as we regulate corporations.
You're not saying that these organizations need to be silenced, though, are you?
I'm not arguing that they don't have a right to express an opinion. Of course they do. I'm not suggesting they shouldn't be allowed to. Of course, they have freedom of speech rights. What I'm saying is that just as we decided corporations could not spread false information about their competitors, that's now illegal. Or false information about they can't mislead or deceive the public about their own status. I'm saying that NGOs, I'm referring to the most egregious situations where NGOs have misled or deceived the public with information. We're not talking about something that's judgmental. We're talking about something that's factual. Either the US has lower GHG per person than Canada, or they do not. And that is empirically verifiable. So I'm referring to those instances where they have made statements, or that pipelines are the most dangerous form of transportation of all, notwithstanding that the data published by PHMSA out of the U.S. Department of Transportation states exactly the contrary.
Tell us, do you think, and I'm talking about the petroleum industry here, that it's easy to get people to stand up against it because, well, let's face it, the industry's reputation in the past has not exactly been above reproach, but I've had a chance to talk to a lot of people in the industry now, talking about leaders right down to rig hands, and they say that they're actually doing a lot of work to try and clean up the industry's image. Do you think it's enough?
I mean, I know that the various associations representing the industry are getting out there, but I don't think they're getting out there anywhere near enough. I think that they should be getting out there with more websites, with more guest speakers. They should be organizing more advertisements on television, explaining what they're doing. The NGOs have had open field. They've been able to go out there and say all manner of things about the corporations and the oil and gas sector, and nobody's been rebutting them, or very, very little rebuttal. So they just ratchet up the rhetoric to raise more money, and there's sounds of silence from the other side. There should be, the industry associations should be challenging and rebutting every major statement, every statement that's made by an NGO that is inaccurate, and they should be going to them in writing and the media saying, and not calling them names. I'm not talking about insulting them. I'm saying, here's what you said, but here's the empirical record using data from StatsCan or from Natural Resources Canada or the U.S. Department of the Environment or the International Energy Agency, using empirical data to refute them, because for too long they've had an open field where the NGOs have been able to say whatever they want without any real fear or concern of any pushback or reprisal. And all I'm saying is we cannot have a good public policy debate when the debate has been so skewed to one side, and, as I said, increasingly frequently using inaccurate information.
Just how important do you think it is for industry leaders to actually make sure that the public, I guess, becomes aware of the good stories in the industry? Because right now, it seems as if a lot of the attention given to oil companies is anything but flattering news.
I wouldn't even call it good stories. How about truthful stories? How about factual stories? How about, to use my favorite word, empirical stories, stating, here's how many we employ. This is the amount of money last year we spent on environmental protection. We spent X billions of dollars or X hundreds of millions of dollars. Here is the number of spills over a 10-year period. They're going down. Here is the number of spills per person. Here is the damage to the environment per incident. I'm talking hard, micro, empirical data.
That's all our time, Ian. Thank you again for sharing your time on a topic that certainly needs a lot more discussion.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
We've been chatting with Dr. Ian Lee, a professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University in Ottawa. That's our show for today. Hope you enjoyed spending time with us here at ICANN Media TV. I'm Rob Hislop.